Hi, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining this live broadcast from. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the webinar for today, which is Sharing Stories to Amplify Your Impact using the new Included, Supported, Empowered Toolkit. And I want to offer a special welcome to nearly 250 registrants on today's call. We're really excited to have you all here with us, and we're excited that you are interested in thinking about how you can use this brand new resource as an opportunity to help spread the message of included, supported, empowered. Before we dive into the content for today's webinar, I wanted to offer a quick introduction of myself. That is me that you see in front of you. I am Sean Lichtenfeld, the Communications Director for Anchor and the Anchor Foundation. And I am really excited about this webinar for a couple of reasons. First of all, I have been working for Anchor and the Anchor Foundation for a little over a year now. And ever since I began, I've been really deeply involved in the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign. And I've really been thinking deeply about how we can make the resources of the campaign useful to the folks who are really trying to make a difference in their communities when it comes to the inclusion of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But on top of that, I am sort of on the side a teacher. I'm an adjunct professor who teaches master's level mid-career professionals how to communicate more effectively. And so the substance of today's webinar really is in the spirit of helping you to communicate more effectively, to conduct outreach more effectively, and to advocate more effectively, such that we can all collectively advance our vision of true inclusion for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I'm grateful to be here today. I'm grateful that you're here today, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Before we get into the conversation, I did want to go over a couple of housekeeping notes just to help ensure the most successful webinar broadcast for all of our participants today. So first of all, please note that this call is being recorded, and the recording will be made available within the next 48 hours to anyone who is registered. Second, please note that all attendees are in listen-only mode. We do this to ensure a high-quality sound experience for people who are going to listen to the recording of this webinar later, but we absolutely welcome any questions that you have. So please use the Q&A feature in the Zoom control panel to pose any questions, and we'll address those not only at the end of the webinar, but also throughout if there are any questions that you have. And finally, if you have any technical difficulties during today's broadcast, you can either use the Zoom chat feature to get in touch with a member of the Anchor team, or you can send an email to anchor@anchor.org, and someone will help to troubleshoot the best that they can. With those housekeeping notes out of the way then, I wanted to give a quick overview of today's agenda. First, we'll talk a little bit about the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign, because I think that's a really helpful foundation for understanding not only what we're trying to achieve more broadly, but also what we're trying to achieve with the toolkit that we're going to be walking you through today. So that will then lead us to our discussion about the toolkit, and I will not only give a sense of what the toolkit really was designed to do, but also give you a very high-level overview of each of the tools that are there and some of the related resources. I'll then walk through a couple of use cases for toolkit tools, so that way you have a sense of just a couple of the different ways that these tools can be adapted in your own context. And of course, these are just two sample use cases among dozens, or I don't know, maybe hundreds of different ways that you could use the Included, Supported, Empowered toolkit. And then finally, we will answer your questions. And as I said a moment ago, we will absolutely answer questions at the end, but we'll also have questions throughout after each section, so that if you have any clarifying questions, we can certainly address those. And so I would encourage you to submit your questions throughout today's broadcast. Don't wait until the end, or don't wait until the section where we actually get to the Q&A. Feel free to jump in, use that question and answer box in your Zoom control panel, and we will answer any questions to the best of our ability. So let's dive in. Before I can really explain why we put together the Included, Supported, Empowered Toolkit, I think it's really important to know a little bit about why we created the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign in the first place. So I want to start with a little bit of background. We all know that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and the providers who support them are not highly visible in American society. And at best, I think that this is because we are intentionally invisible. Think about the direct support professional who stands back when out in the community so that they can let the individual that they support shine. Or think about the back office managers who spend their days behind the scenes navigating increasingly complex Medicaid systems to ensure that their agencies can continue to deliver the critical services that the people they support rely on. Those folks are really intentionally invisible. But on the other end of the spectrum, you really have what I would consider a long history of discrimination and a combination of thoughtless and intentional exclusion for people with disabilities from our society, right? And we don't see people who are not quote unquote neurotypical for their contributions and the ways that they enrich our communities, right? We at our worst see them only for what they take from our society and not what they contribute to society. And as a result of all of that, people are not only unaware of what we do, but they are certainly unaware of the conditions under which we do it. They don't have a clear sense of what difference it makes for the individuals that are being supported, for their family members and for their communities. And they don't really have a clear sense of just what's possible when people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have the level of support that they need to be fully included in the community. And compounding the problem, of course, is that if you just took a quick read of the press, it would suggest that the people providing services and supports to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are only capable of horrible, awful things like fraud and abuse and neglect. And you don't need to look particularly far to find an instance of malpractice in any number of major newspapers in the United States or to lead the nightly news. And to be sure, we believe that these stories absolutely should be told. I would say that they must be told because we need to know what's happening. We need to know what challenges there are facing individuals and their family members. We need to know what cracks are in the system, and we need to be held accountable. But for every one story of a provider behaving badly, there are thousands of other stories of providers moving mountains and making magic, all in the name of ensuring that the people that they support can be included in the community. But the problem is that those stories that tug at the heartstrings and really show powerful emotion and really pull back the curtain on what's possible, those are not the stories that we see in the press and in the newspaper and on the nightly news. So Included, Supported, Empowered then is the Anchor Foundation's solution to start fighting back against this skewed narrative and say enough is enough, right? So Included, Supported, Empowered is a 3-year initiative that really officially launched in 2018 that's designed to lift up the successes of people with IDD, that's designed to highlight the critical role that providers play in making those successes possible, and that's designed to elevate the national narrative about what's possible when we get serious about supporting people of all abilities as valued members of the community, rather than being relegated to the shadows that they've occupied for far too long. So then the question becomes, why this toolkit? For more than a year, the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign has amassed quite an impressive array of weapons in our arsenal that we are using to transform this campaign and this initiative into a movement. To date, we have placed 86 stories in media outlets across the country and cross-posted or published nearly 100 others to the Included, Supported, Empowered website. We've reached more than 404 million people via earned media and millions more via social media. We have taken our message on the road to more than a dozen states, from Alaska to Virginia to Maine to Oregon and everywhere in between. And we've interviewed now hundreds of providers and direct support professionals and self-advocates and family members of people with disabilities and others to amplify their personal stories and their personal experiences. And let me be really clear, all of that is lovely, right? We need those stories, we need all of those things, and they're all effectively doing what we not only knew from our decades of experience as a provider association that needed to be shared, but we also knew from hearing from everyday champions like you that we needed a campaign that could help fuel our advocacy and our media outreach and messaging our services and telling our stories. But we also knew, and we also heard from the 1,600 plus community of providers that comprise Anchor's membership, that these resources are best put to use with guidance on how to leverage them. So for example, you might be inspired to write an op-ed or a letter to the editor in response to a story about what's happening in your community related to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But if you don't know how to frame your opinion piece, or if you don't know how to find where you should send it, or if you don't know how to craft a pitch note to go with it, then your best intentions aren't going to be actionable, right? Similarly, we could flood your inboxes with lovely stories all day long, and spoiler alert, we're going to. But if you're unsure of how to share those resources and share those stories, or how to include them in a message to your lawmaker, or how to craft the kind of ask that you would want to make to a lawmaker once you have grabbed their attention, then those stories are going to do really well to tug at the heartstrings, but not a whole lot else. And so the Included, Supported, Empowered Toolkit is really designed to be sort of the bridge between the vision that we all share and the actions that we believe will be transformative in our efforts to turn our vision into a reality. So having laid that foundation, I want to quickly go through the 8 tools that comprise the Included, Supported, Empowered Toolkit. And there's 8 tools, but there's also sort of a user guide that we call tool number 0. So to access the toolkit, you're going to go to wehaveastake.org/toolkit, or if you're already on the Included, Supported, Empowered website, which is wehaveastake.org, you can go to that resources tab in the top navigation menu, and in the drop down that pops up, you'll see a campaign toolkit link, and you can use that to get to what you see in front of you, which is the toolkit directory. So you're going to start with tool 0, which is that user guide. And really, this user guide gives you a lay of the land and kind of helps you to identify where you should start, depending on what your objective might be. Then tool number 1, which is called Messaging the Movement, includes key messages for talking about the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign, but also key messages for talking about our issues, such as the difference between providers and direct support professionals, or talking about Medicaid and sort of how some of the Medicaid regulations can inhibit the ability of providers to provide the supports and services that are so critical to people with IDD. In other words, tool number 1 really helps you to know what the message is. And by comparison, tool number 2, which is our shareable content tool, helps you to know how to amplify that message. So it includes customizable social media posts, sample copy that you can adapt for your newsletters or your websites or your blog. It includes tips for writing an article or some long form piece that makes the case for disability inclusion, right? All of these things that kind of help amplify a message of inclusion. Tool number 3, which is about identifying and developing your story, walks you through what we even mean when we talk about storytelling, and talks about how we can identify what stories you might have from your personal experience that could be compelling. But it also talks about how the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign has gone about crafting and telling stories as a way of sort of sparking ideas that could help you think through, oh, you know, there's that local community group that has a blog that could be a really interesting venue that where we could write about our issues, or maybe there's a reporter who writes about lifestyle issues for your local paper. You know, giving those kinds of ideas so that you get a sense of the variety of different ways that you can amplify the message. So in other words, tool 3 is really about helping you to know how to strengthen your message with your own personal experience and with your own personal story. Then tool number 4, which is called Using the Campaign Story, offers guidance for finding stories on the Included, Supported, Empowered website. And these stories in our story bank could either be used in lieu of your personal story, or it can be used to enhance the impact of your story. But this tool also offers you guidance about how to leverage the stories on the website as you work to advance your own purposes. So in other words, tool number 4 is really about helping you know how to put stories to work in service of whatever your goals might be. Tool number 5, which is expanding the campaign's reach, poses a wealth of different ideas for how you can broaden your support of the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign's shared vision. So no matter how directly or indirectly you're involved in our work, this tool offers you some quick and dirty tips for how you can follow the campaign, invite others to follow the campaign, share the campaign's stories, make a donation to the campaign. In other words, this tool is really about helping you grow the campaign, even if you only have 2 minutes to spare, right? We really are grateful for the time and the energy from our advocates and our campaign champions. And whether you have 1 minute or 5 minutes or 5 hours that you can spare, there are ways that you can, with a relatively low level of effort, make a really big impact as we work to advance our broader message about the need to ensure that people with IDD are included, supported, and empowered. Tool number 6, which is about engaging the media, walks you through the various options that you have for garnering attention for your issues in the media. So included are tips for writing and placing an op-ed, tips for pitching a story, ideas for promoting stories once they've been published, and a whole lot more. In other words, this tool really helps you to know how to garner visibility for your story, which is a really important step for you to take because, of course, if we are to be successful in bringing people out of the shadows and making people with disabilities no longer invisible, we really need to make sure that we are heightening public awareness, and the media is obviously a critical tool for doing that. 2 more tools in the toolkit. Tool number 7 is the editorial calendar. And this tool includes potential hooks that you can use to make, a statement publicly about a particular issue, or if you want to hook into, something that might be timely and relevant to draw attention for your issues. A good example of this is, I'm thinking about in a few weeks, National Disability Voter Registration Week, which is July 15th through 19th. That could be a really great time to talk about the importance of supporting individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to be civically engaged and to be registered to vote and to go to town halls and talk to candidates about, the issues that are most important to them, right? That's a great hook, and the editorial calendar tool helps you identify opportunities like that. So in other words, this tool is really about helping you know how to time your message such that it captures the attention of your audience. And finally, tool number 8 is the resource library. And really, honestly, this is a comprehensive set of helpful resources, all in kind of one handy location. It offers things like links to key publications, like our direct support professional workforce crisis white paper. It offers campaign collateral, a link to our video library, and a whole lot more. In other words, this tool is really about kind of helping you know where to go if you don't necessarily know what you're looking for, right? If you're just kind of getting started and you want to support the campaign, or if you've got ideas for how you can tell stories about your own personal experience or your family's experience or your, the experiences of individuals supported by your agency, this is your go-to spot to really, find what you might not even know you're looking for. So, given that we have a whole, series of tools, we'll obviously get into some practical use cases in a moment. But I did just want to stop here and offer up the opportunity for any clarifying questions that you might have before we dive into our different use cases. One question that I saw come through the Q&A panel was about whether or not this webinar was going to be captioned. And if you're listening to this broadcast live, it is not captioned. However, we will be sharing a link to the recording after the fact, and we will enable captioning when we share it through a YouTube link. So if you've used YouTube's captioning system, basically you can just turn that on, and we will make sure that the video is capable of handling those captions. And the other thing that I will say about the video that you're going to receive is that we would love for you to share this with others in your organization or others in your advocacy coalitions If you've got folks that you think might be really interested, this recording is, specifically designed to be applicable for anyone who cares about disability issues generally. Even though ANCOR is the provider association for community providers, we certainly see utility for this webinar beyond just providers. So if you're a family member or an individual with a disability or someone who is just generally supportive of the issues, we hope that you'll consider sharing this video with anybody who might be interested. One other question that is coming through the Q&A panel is from Mishka Larson, who is asking if I can give examples on how any of these tools are used effectively. And I'm going to answer that in two different ways, Mishka. First is to say that I will go through two use cases that will illustrate sort of two examples of how these tools can be used. I will also say, though, that these tools are brand new. We've just released the toolkit in the last 2 weeks. And so because of that, we don't necessarily have stories from, people out there in the field using these tools and knowing how it goes. And I'll give you a little bit more detail at the end of today's webinar about this. But one of the things that we're going to be asking you for in our follow-up evaluation is whether or not you anticipate using the tools. And if so, if you're comfortable with us contacting you in 3 months or 6 months down the road so that we can get your feedback on how it's going and whether or not the tools are useful. So while we have, dozens and dozens of examples of how organizations and individual champions are using the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign, we don't yet have data on how the toolkit is being used because it's a brand new resource, like I said. So certainly we'll share those things as we go, and we'll absolutely look forward to your feedback. So moving along, what I want to do in sort of laying out each of these, what I'm calling use cases, is to kind of lay out a scenario and give you a sense of sort of what a kind of common use might be, and then walk through how you can use the tools to address the particular situation in the scenario presented. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we don't necessarily want to suggest that these are the only ways to use the tools. That should be pretty obvious because we will only walk through a couple of the tools in a lot of depth. But rather, these are just examples, 2 examples among a whole slew of how you could think about using the toolkit for your own purposes. So let's start with the first use case. If I can get my slide to advance, that would probably help. Our first use case is using the campaign stories to engage lawmakers. So imagine you're Connie, and you are the older sister of a woman named Debbie who has an intellectual disability. You live in Florida, where the state legislature is considering a 5% increase to the reimbursement rate for direct support professionals. And generally speaking, you have a sense of why this increase is important because you've navigated the system on your sister's behalf and you know just how underpaid direct support professionals are, but you're certainly not a national expert, right? You're not testifying on Capitol Hill about Medicaid programs. You're not, meeting with state regulators about Medicaid. You're generally a concerned citizen, right? Now, full disclosure, I will say that the state of Florida, to my knowledge, is not currently considering a rate increase. They should, and I hope they do. I hope every state does. But I will disclose that Connie and Debbie are real people because actually Connie is my mom and Debbie is my aunt. So here they are with 2 of my 3 older sisters and some stranger who I have no idea who she is. So on your left is my sister Laura. In the middle is my aunt Debbie. To Debbie's left is my sister Lynette, and all the way on your right is my mom Connie. I don't know who the woman in plaid is. Maybe she taught them how to paint those canvases and those ornaments. It's not entirely clear to me, but it's also not important. Now, in this scenario, Connie knows a good bit about the service delivery system. Like I said, she's navigated it on her sister's behalf, and she understands the challenges that are facing families and providers. But she's certainly more of a concerned citizen than any kind of like expert on these issues. And for that reason, she's a perfect person to use the Included, Supported, Empowered Toolkit because her personal experience is compelling. She understands how important it is for Debbie to have stable staffing at the group home where she lives with 2 other women with intellectual disabilities. And so she's somebody who is ready to take action, but is not necessarily, you know, sure about where to start, or maybe she's not totally confident in her ability to make a difference. So how can the toolkit help her? And I'm actually going to walk through the tools in the toolkit, you know, in real time so that you can see this. And hopefully there's not too much of a lag as I navigate through the Included, Supported, Empowered website. So you're going to go, like I said, to wehaveastake.org/toolkit, or if you're already at wehaveastake.org, you can use the resources tab to navigate to the campaign toolkit link. But before you even dive into any of the individual tools, the first thing that Connie needs to know is that she really can make a difference. Before she can even attempt to become an advocate, she needs to believe in her ability to make a difference. And so if you walk away from this broadcast with nothing but this one piece of information, let it be this, that you really can make a difference. Just earlier this week, ANCOR's government relations team mobilized several hundred advocates to make over 1,000 phone calls to members of Congress to protect the Money Follows the Person program and to advocate for its reauthorization. In many congressional districts, the only person that the member of Congress heard from was the one ANCOR member who called and said, please support reauthorization of MFP funding. And that one phone call was enough to make a difference to get that member of Congress to support the reauthorization effort. So if you don't think that one person can make a difference, you are wrong. And I hope that you will take that message with you as you engage more deeply in your advocacy, or as you engage more deeply in your efforts to champion disability inclusion. Now, of course, having said all of that, I absolutely don't want you to walk away with only that one thing. So please know also that there are other tools in the toolkit that can help people like Connie tell her story and to use her voice to, you know, really make a difference and to amplify the message that the state legislature should adopt the legislation that would increase the Medicaid reimbursement rate for direct support workers. So in this scenario, the 2 tools that Connie will really want to be familiar with is tool number 1, messaging the movement, and tool number 4, using the campaign's stories. So let's start with tool number 1. And when you click on any of these, it should open them in a new window. So that way you can always go back to that toolkit directory and have easy access to it there. But because, well, let me first start by saying that what Connie is going to find when she starts to look at each of these tools is this in this section list, which kind of walks through each of the individual pieces of the tool and the resources that are available. And then if you click on any of those individual headings, right, you know, messages talking about included, supported, empowered, it will expand the content, right, and it'll give you some information. So in Connie's case, because she's not trying to promote the campaign as much as she is the need for a solution to the DSP workforce crisis, she's just going to navigate straight to the section about talking about the issues. And once she's there and expands that menu, she's going to see 3 sort of sets of key messages. One about providers, one about direct support professionals or DSPs, and one about the Medicaid system more generally. Now the bullets about providers in that top section of this tool clarify what kinds of agencies we're talking about when we use the term providers, and it gives a short explanation of the kinds of services that providers deliver to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The bullets about DSPs explain the kinds of job titles that DSPs have and the various roles that they fulfill, and contextualizes the direct support work against the backdrop of the crisis that the workforce is currently in. So if you're unfamiliar, DSPs are severely underpaid, which leads to high turnover rates, high vacancy rates, DSPs working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And all of that can have a negative impact, 1, on the ability of a provider agency to actually deliver the services that people with IDD rely on, but 2, it creates instability of the service delivery even when the services are being delivered, right? A direct support professional needs to really know the individual and really be familiar with their support plan and really, develop that relationship, which is really hard to do if there's a new DSP in that role every 3 months because they cannot afford to continue working for their provider agency. And then finally, the section about Medicaid, these bullets explain the role that our policy systems play in contributing to all of the problems that I was just describing. So Medicaid is really complex. I am far from an expert in Medicaid policy, but this section is intentionally general because we cannot, and frankly probably would not want to, get into the weeds regarding every component of a state's Medicaid program. But what these bullets do is paint, at least in broad brush strokes, the ways in which Medicaid systems inhibit the ability of providers and of direct support professionals to deliver the quality of services that people with IDD not only need, but quite frankly deserve in their quest to be fully included in the community. So I should note that the bullet points on the issues that you see in front of you are really designed to do two things. One, give people like Connie the baseline knowledge that she would need in order to engage in a conversation with her lawmakers about the issues. But two, these key messages serve as the foundation for more in-depth messaging that people like Connie could craft if she wanted to engage really in any kind of outreach, but in this specific case, in outreach to her 2 state legislators. Now, the other section of Tool 1 that is going to be really relevant for Connie's purposes then is the related resources section at the bottom. And you'll note that this related resources section is a recurring feature in just about all of the tools that we offer. And in that related resources section, Connie is going to find Anchor's white paper, which unpacks the data about the DSP workforce crisis and illustrates kind of the scope of that crisis. She's going to find information about the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign, which, she may not be interested in talking about the campaign, but the one-pager that you'll find there, for example, talks about solutions to the broad problems that we're trying to tackle, and information about the exclusion of people with IDD in the community, and so on and so forth. And then she'll also find there a link to a playlist with 7 minute-long videos that articulate from the perspective of direct support professionals what it means to be part of this workforce, what challenges are facing that workforce, and why this work and investing in this work is so critically important. So Connie can use each of the above resources in Tool 1 to craft messages to her lawmakers to eloquently articulate the importance of a reimbursement rate increase. But of course, that is not on its own going to be enough. So the next stop for Connie is going to be to tool number 4. And she can either get there by using the navigation at the bottom of each page where it says next tool or previous tool. But since we're going to jump from tool number 1 to tool number 4, it might just be easier to go back to the directory page and select tool number 4. And this particular tool, as I mentioned earlier, is really focused on how to use stories that already exist in the Included, Supported, Empowered story bank. And we have a whole wealth of stories. I'll get there in a minute. But I do want to just note that somebody like Connie, could absolutely talk about these issues from her own personal experience and from her experience as the sibling of a person with a disability. But she may not want to. Maybe she doesn't feel comfortable disclosing information about her background or Debbie's background, or maybe she's not comfortable talking about the challenges that her provider agency is facing. And so she wants to use other stories, or maybe she wants to tell her own story, but use other people's stories to reinforce the message and tell it from a variety of perspectives. And ultimately, that's what the stories on the Included, Supported, Empowered website are designed to do. Now, I will say that there are a couple of different ways that you can get to the stories. First, if you go to any page on the wehaveastake.org site, you can click the Stories tab at the very top, and you'll find our 6 most recent stories. And then you can, of course, click to load more, and you'll see the next 6. We have hundreds there. Now, because we have so many there, I recommend that what you actually do is start up here in the upper right-hand corner with this search field, and type something that is going to render stories that might be relevant to your interests. So for Connie, since she's interested in solving the DSP workforce crisis, she could type in like DSP crisis. And when she does, she's going to get at least a couple of resources. There's a story about an award-winning direct support professional. This video from PAR, which is the State Provider Association in Pennsylvania, called Fix the DSP Crisis, is a great resource because it doesn't necessarily talk about just the situation in Pennsylvania, but it talks about the DSP workforce crisis in a national context, right? So that could be a really great resource to share. But of course, Connie might be interested, given that she's in Florida, in raising up the important work that DSPs do specifically in her own state. And so maybe what she wants to do in this case is go back to the search. And if you're already on a search page, you can use this search field here, or you can always just go back to this magnifying glass icon and just type in Florida. And every story where Florida is mentioned should come up. So you'll find profiles like, for example, Martavius Moore, who is a direct support professional for Sunrise Communities in Miami. Martavius won a special category award in the 2019 DSP of the Year Awards that Anchor awarded in May. You'll scroll down and you'll note that there's another award winner. This is the Florida DSP of the Year for 2019, Philip Kibbett, who is a DSP from Bright Spring Health Services in Clearwater. And all of those profiles are really, demonstrative of just how critical the work of a DSP is. It really illustrates that it's not just, a DSP who, helps somebody fulfill their, hygiene routine, but they're doing everything from helping folks find long-lost family members, to navigate the political system, to understanding how to register to vote, and so much more. So when Connie's found the stories that she wants, then the last stop that she'll go on tool number 4 is to the related resources section. And she's going to find a whole slew of things there in tool number 4, including the Anchor Amplifier, which is a place where she can find information about taking action at the federal level. There's an introductory guide there on how to advocate that goes much more into depth about some of the questions that might arise as you're using tool number 4, and a whole lot more. So now Connie has all of the ingredients that she needs to write to Mel Ponder, who is her state representative, and George Gaynor, who is her state senator. She has a general sense of the issues. She has talking points to educate those lawmakers. She has stories to illustrate what excellence in direct support looks like. She has resources to go to if she needs additional guidance on how to make her advocacy effective. And of course, above all, she has her own personal experience as the sibling of a person with an intellectual disability. Now, in our second use case, I'll go back to my PowerPoint slides here. In our second use case, what we want to do is talk about creating your own story to engage the press. So whereas Connie was really interested in using existing stories to engage policymakers, the context here is a little bit different. Here, we're trying to either identify a personal story or use our own personal story, but we're trying to not necessarily use that in an advocacy context, but rather to raise awareness for a particular issue. So imagine that you are Alex, a volunteer who has been actively involved with his local homelessness organization in Nashville. And Alex doesn't necessarily have any natural ties to disability. Unlike Connie, he doesn't have a family member with IDD, he doesn't work with a provider agency on a regular basis or anything like that. But as he volunteers more of his time to advance affordable housing, he realizes more and more that people with disabilities are disproportionately likely to lack access to affordable housing, and that this challenge is exacerbated by a shortage of accessible housing for people with disabilities in the Nashville area. Now, Alex realizes that people in his community are generally aware of the housing shortage, right? Nashville's real estate market is blown up in the last several years, but there's virtually no discussion about what impact this is having on people with disabilities in particular. And so what he wants to do is engage the local media to bring attention to the issue. And like Connie, he's just not really sure where to start. Full disclosure, I am not related to Alex. Alex is not like my brother or anything like that. So, unfortunately, I only have so many family members who could actually use the toolkit. But Alex is somebody who is perfect for using this toolkit because even though he's primarily motivated by the housing issue, he's the kind of person that could be compelled to engage in disability issues because underlying both housing and disability are issues related to equity and to inclusion. And so there's a good opportunity here. And I want to take a quick sidebar and say that this is an important lesson to consider. As you work with this toolkit, and as you work to advance the broader set of issues that relate to our efforts to create truly inclusive communities, you really want to consider who are the unlikely bedfellows that might make for good partners. If our campaign is to grow into a burgeoning movement, then we need to search beyond disability and beyond disability advocacy organizations to find our champions. And so we need to build broader coalitions, and sometimes groups working on seemingly unrelated issues can be powerful coalition partners. So for this reason, even though Alex isn't quote unquote a disability advocate or a disability person, he is somebody who absolutely can be engaged to support the campaign and to advance its core objectives of truly inclusive communities. The other good news for Alex, of course, is that there are tools in the toolkit that he can use. So I'm going to switch back to the toolkit, and I'm going to go back to that directory page. And here, Alex is going to want to be aware of tool number 3, which is identifying and developing your story, and tool number 6 on engaging the media. So let's start with tool number 3. Here, Alex is going to find an overview about what we mean when we talk about storytelling. He's going to find a set of questions that he should ask himself as he considers what kind of story might be compelling. He's going to find sample stories that we've already developed for the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign, so it gives him some ideas about how he might consider getting visibility for his interests. And he's going to find information about the roles that the Anchor Foundation staff can play in helping you to tell your story. So, sidebar, we are here to support your efforts. This tool has a whole series of ways that we can do that. So click on this Included, Supported, Empowered is here to help section, and you'll find what you need to know. Now, for Alex's purposes, he already knows the power of storytelling, so he should start with the section on identifying compelling stories, and that's right up here, this second section. And there he's going to find some questions to guide his thinking. And it leads him to consider things like, does he know a person with a disability who experienced homelessness, or somebody who is at risk of becoming homeless? And how did that person's disability or their support needs make the situation especially challenging or difficult? And what changes, either in public policy or in community practice, could have changed the situation so that person wasn't at risk of becoming homeless? And asking himself these questions, Alex remembers working with a young woman named Ramona, who has cerebral palsy and who was homeless for several months after being laid off from her job as a graphic designer for the local Chamber of Commerce or tourism board. And Ramona had a little bit of savings, but it was hard enough to find a place that she could rent that she could afford on those savings. But even if she was able to find a cheaper place to live, it had to be accessible, right? She uses a wheelchair, and her savings weren't going to be enough to cover the adaptive technology that had been installed in her previous apartment. So with Ramona's story being the perfect demonstration of the problem, Alex felt like he could reach out to Ramona to find out if she would be game to tell that story more publicly. And she happily agreed. The organization that Alex volunteers with moved mountains to help her transition to an affordable and accessible home. And so she felt compelled to share her story so that others wouldn't fall victim to the same pitfalls in the system that she experienced while she was displaced. So with Ramona on board, Alex can now go to the next section of tool number 3 and get some ideas about how the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign has developed and disseminated stories. And with these ideas, in this third section here, he really starts to envision the kind of story that he could see featured on the pages of the Tennessean, which is the local newspaper in Nashville. Alex also can use the How We Can Help section down here that I mentioned earlier to keep our contact information handy, and that can be really helpful later on down the road. So having kind of used tool number 3, then the next step for Alex is going to be to go to tool number 6, which is about engaging the media. And here he's going to find an overview of the media relations process, which offers an explanation of the difference between getting an op-ed published versus pitching a story to a reporter. He's going to find tips for how to write and place an op-ed, how to pitch a story, all kinds of other things. And here, Alex would probably most likely start with this section on tips for writing or placing an op-ed, but he would quickly learn that this probably isn't the best option for him, not only because there isn't an idea or a policy proposal on the table that he's trying to support, but also because as a volunteer for the homelessness organization, he doesn't carry the same sort of like cachet that maybe the executive director or the CEO might. And so for that reason, he actually moves on to the section about tips for pitching a story to a reporter, and very quickly realizes that this might actually be a better approach. And as he reviews this section, what he finds is that he has everything that he needs to make a compelling pitch. He has a concise message about how people with disabilities are being especially hard hit by the city's housing affordability crisis. He has buy-in from Ramona, who is willing to sit down with reporters to share her personal experience. Alex has data from his own homelessness organization about the scope of the problem facing Nashvillians in general, but more specifically, Nashvillians with disabilities. And he has contact information for the Anchor Foundation, myself in particular. And we're happy to do things like use our media contacts database to help you identify what outlets or what reporters you might consider reaching out to. So with all of the ingredients there, Alex is ready to write an email to Sarah Rodriguez, who is a reporter for the Tennessean, making the case for why she should be digging into this issue about homelessness and people with disabilities. Now, if Sarah's interested, then Alex is going to talk to her about any questions that she has. He's going to put her in touch with Ramona, and he's going to be ready to serve as a helpful resource in her quest to shed light on this important issue. Now, if everything goes according to plan, Sarah is going to write a lovely story about Ramona and about people like her who have not only experienced homelessness, but whose experience with homelessness has been exacerbated by their support needs or by their assistive technology needs or whatever the case may be. And once the story then is published, Alex is going to go back here to tool number 6 and consult that section about what to do to promote successful placements. And this is a really important piece that I want to underscore because, you don't just like get a story placed and then like hope and pray that people see it, right? Once you go to this section, you glean ideas for how to make sure that it's not only visible, but also to make sure that the story is visible by the right audiences, right? So that tool is going to guide him to do things like share it with his organization's staff and donors and other volunteers. It's going to guide him to post the link to the article in the local housing and homelessness group that he's part of on Facebook. It'll give him the idea to share the link in an email with local disability providers and use that as an invitation to talk about how disability groups and housing and homelessness groups could partner together. Now, I want to say that with both Alex's story and Connie's story, there are a couple of important things to keep in mind. The first is that the use cases presented here are just 2 examples among dozens or hundreds of ways that you could adapt the toolkit to your purposes. So I know that I've said that a couple of times, but what I want to present to you is a way of thinking about how to adapt the tools in the context of your own personal experiences and the issues that you see as more pressing. Because even though we ultimately all share the same vision, we might be approaching that vision from different perspectives. And I think it's the diversity of those perspectives that is going to make us most successful. Second, I would encourage you to keep in mind that this toolkit is designed to be applicable for a wide array of users. So Alex and Connie are just 2 sort of exemplars, but you could use the toolkit if you are a self-advocate, a parent, a sibling, a provider, a direct support professional, somebody who is just generally supportive of people with disabilities. And so obviously you're already bought into that notion because you are on today's call, but I would encourage you to share this recording with anybody who sort of fits into those categories. And finally, the last thing I'll say before I open it up to Q&A is that this toolkit is a living resource. And we want to not only track how it's being used, but also adapt the toolkit to better meet your needs. So I mentioned this a little bit before when I was responding to Mishka's question, but after the live broadcast, you're going to receive an email from me with a link to the evaluation. And that evaluation is going to ask you what ideas you have for improving or adding to this toolkit, as well as whether or not you're willing to be contacted by us in the next 3 to 6 months so that we can follow up with you, ask if you've used the tools, and if so, get your sense of how they could be improved. So I hope you'll consider saying yes to that, and I hope that you'll share any feedback that you might have. So I will stop there, and I will open the floor up to questions from the audience. And I see 2 questions in front of me. I'll just say that if you're still with us, feel free to use the Q&A panel, and we'll spend about 10 minutes or so addressing the questions that you have. So the first question, which is from M. Rieger, says, all the information contained in these sections is open source, ? It's not copyrighted. So in Connie's case, could she copy and paste some of the language directly from the site? The answer to that is absolutely. We do not want to create these resources so that they can never be used. So copy and paste out of the website, out of the one-pagers, out of the various messaging guides, right? There's no intellectual property concerns here. The Included, Supported, Empowered campaign is in addition to a public awareness raising campaign, it's a fundraising campaign specifically so that we could generate the resources that you can take and use as is or customize to whatever extent that you want. So please do lift directly from the site and absolutely share those stories. The only thing to know is that if you are sharing a story from like a newspaper or something like that, the newspaper will prefer that you source your site. So if you are using a story from the Houston Chronicle, you want to just make sure that you attribute it. But you definitely do not need to attribute anything to the Anchor Foundation or to the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign. The second question from Michelle Grasso, and I love this idea, and I'm gonna maybe pick your brain about this afterwards, is have we thought about pitching this to the Ad Council to be considered as one of its campaigns? And I think that's a great question. We haven't talked specifically about the Ad Council, but what we have done is we've talked about, PR agencies that provide pro bono support, or thinking about the different kinds of, groups that could connect us with someone who has, the ability, like I think about, the other group I think about is the National Association of Broadcasters. Those are absolutely good opportunities. And so I'll say both to Michelle's question, but also to anybody else who might be listening, that if you have connections or if you have ideas how we can really sort of take this to the next level, we are absolutely open to them. At the end of this webinar, I'm going to share my contact information with you, and you can just email me or give me a call, and I would love to discuss that. So Star Dobush, I'm sorry if I'm saying your last name incorrectly, Star, suggests that we should think about a search guide and what do we want to, creating filters based on like what somebody might want to search or write about. And just thinking that, I love that idea. And one of the things that we've been thinking a lot about is, when we started this campaign, just to give you a little bit of context, we didn't have a ton of stories. And so having a complex way of like indexing them and filtering them didn't make a lot of sense. But we have been overwhelmed by the number of stories that have been submitted to us that we've been able to cross-post and things like that. And so now we have a lot there. So I think we really will have to adapt some kind of a system for indexing or organizing the stories. And so I would certainly welcome your feedback. And to your direct question, Star, that is something that we'll be thinking about later this year. On that note, I'll also add that if you are affiliated with some kind of a provider agency, or if you've just seen stories in your local paper or in blogs that you follow that talk about people with IDD being supported to be part of the community, please send those to us. We obviously search, we have alerts set up to kind of alert us to stories that are being published. But if you know of stories, or if you think oh man, that's a great story and more people should see it, we're happy to amplify that. And that's another quick and easy way that you can kind of help advance the purposes of the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign. The next question is from Marcy Davis. Oh, and I think, Marcy, I might have just answered your question. Marcy asks, if we're aware of a story in our area, is there a way to share it so that you can decide if you want to add it to the stories? Absolutely. In a moment, I'll share my contact information, and we will, I'm always open to that. And the other thing that I'll say, and this is included in the toolkit, but it's not just the stories that have already been published, but if you have a great idea for a story that you think could be really compelling, but it hasn't really gotten any attention, reach out. We can help you brainstorm if we think it's a good hook for a reporter to write about. We could welcome a write-up from you on our blog. You could publish something on Medium or a site like that. We could cross-post something from Facebook or Instagram. There's no one right approach. And so absolutely any stories, whether they are fully baked, half-baked, or barely even in the oven, let us know, and we'll absolutely be as helpful as we can be. So I'm looking at another question from Star, and he's saying, it would be great it's great to look at stories by state or by topic, but it would have been harder to know that you could search in that search link. So I think what we can do to help ameliorate that problem, Star, and anyone else that might be having issues navigating the site, is adding a little bit more clarity about how to use the site, how to work through it. In a lot of ways, this is ultimately why we created this toolkit, is that the resources were there in a lot of cases, but it's a lot to sift through, and we want to be mindful of the fact that we don't all have unlimited time to spend on these kinds of things. So absolutely appreciate that suggestion. I've got a couple of things that I want to say sort of by way of conclusion. So I'm going to close the Q&A part of this call since we only have 3 minutes left, but I will just say that if you had a question that you didn't get to ask, or if a question comes up later today, or as you think about and reflect on today's webinar, feel free to send that to us, and we will follow up with you directly one-on-one. And we would love to hear from you about your questions, your thoughts, or any ideas that you might have to improve the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign and the toolkit that we've been talking about today. So by way of conclusion, I want to offer a reminder that within 48 hours, you are going to receive a follow-up email from me. And that email is going to include a link to the recording, which we encourage you to use to view any parts that you might have missed today, or to share it with friends, colleagues, and other potential campaign champions. And then also in that email, you will find a link to the evaluation. And as I mentioned, that evaluation is going to ask you whether you plan to use the tools introduced today, and if we can follow up with you down the road to see whether or not you've been able to put those tools to good use. So please do let us know if you're willing to be contacted, and that way we can get a clear sense from people's real experiences of what's most useful and what are some of the things that might require a little bit of revising. And finally, I mentioned that I would share my contact information. That's on the screen in front of you, and you are welcome to reach out via email. You can call me. That's my handle if you want to connect on Twitter or on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions that weren't answered during today's call, or if there is any way that we can support your efforts to carry forth the banner of the Included, Supported, Empowered campaign, I really do hope that you will be in touch. So thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you all spending the time to be with us today, and we look forward to talking with you on future webinars. Take care.